Hello and welcome back to another episode of Raise the Vibe with Liz. I'm your host, Liz Peterson, and today I have Katrina Foe joining me today. Katrina Foe became a functional practitioner after getting her own breast cancer into remission 100% naturally. She is board certified in holistic nutrition and has been in the health field since she opened her Pilates studio at the age of 24. She also homeschooled her 7 children while writing her international bestseller, Nutritional Pilates. And we're going to be discussing everything that she has to share about her journey. I'm super excited. I want to say, excuse me for my voice. I'm recovering from a cold, obviously. You can hear it in my voice. So my apologies. We're just going to focus on Katrina today and let her take the stage. I do want to plug before we get started that my new book just came out, Sex Magic. So check that out on Amazon. And it's also coming up on the anniversary of my first book, my memoir of death, grief, and afterlife communication. Mom died last night. So if you haven't read that, check that out. I also have a couple classes coming up in March. So be on the lookout for a mediumship circle and a sex magic workshop. So that's going to be fun. All right, getting to Katrina and her story and her journey of healing. Katrina, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much, Liz. It's great to be with you.
It's great to have you. Let's start from the beginning, as I do with all of my guests, and tell me what your journey was to right now.
Yeah, because everyone has a journey to get where they're at, right?
Yes.
For me, I was a mom that had quite a few children and had, some different health things that we had already worked through. And I was working on our health. We had been doing all the stuff. We had already, changed out our toiletries. We made our own chapsticks and soap, and, we ate everything scratch, all organic and everything. I mean, to the point where we had actually moved to Idaho so that we could raise our own meat animals. So I found a lump when I was nursing my 5th baby. And I didn't think much of it because I had a plugged duct at the time, and that would make sense. But then it didn't go away when the plugged duct opens up. And I wasn't really concerned. A nursing mom's breast is kind of shifting, if you will. But my mom got kind of freaked out and mentioned, which was the first time I'd heard it, that my grandmother, her mom, had had a double mastectomy. And I'm like, oh, did she have breast cancer? And she's like, I don't know. It was kind of strange, but I guess back then people didn't talk about it quite as much, and it happened when my mom was away at college. So
Wow.
I looked into things, and it did indeed turn out to be breast cancer. And so I kind of put everything on the table of clearly something that I think is healthy that I am doing is not right. And I want to make sure I don't miss it with my own biases of thinking I already am doing the right stuff. So I put everything out on the table and started to dig through and look into the research and all what people were doing. I already kind of knew in my heart I didn't really want the standard of care because I had some people close to me have poor outcomes and poor experiences with it. And I really already knew that I wanted to address why I got cancer. I just didn't know what that meant at that point. So the first thing that I did, I went down to a Gerson clinic in Mexico. And they do, for your listeners that may or may not know, they do a raw vegan diet, like a dozen fresh juices a day, lots of coffee enemas, and then like a set group of supplements for everybody. And I had a lot of questions with that. You weren't allowed to eat any fat or any salt. And it seemed a little contrary to what I had already learned. So I was asking questions. And by the 3rd day, the director of the facility sat me down and said that I needed to trust in the process. And he was, I was asking too many questions.
Wow.
And I was just blown away. I'm like, are you kidding? I want to understand this. I mean, it's kind of important. It's my life on the line.
Mm-hmm.
And he suggested that this wasn't the place for me and I needed to leave.
Wow. Thank
Right?
him now.
I know. So I'm super grateful because the research and what I've learned now, that was not what my body needed. So I'm really grateful. Although I still love my coffee enemas, the juicing was fueling my insulin resistance, which I didn't know was brewing, all sorts of stuff. But at that point, I found a functional practitioner who started running all sorts of labs. A lot of what I do now is very similar, although there's new cool labs out. And we looked at like my diet, my lifestyle, like all the stuff to try to put together what exactly was going on and what was creating this imbalance so that my body wasn't able to take care of it the way it's supposed to take care of cancer cells when somebody's healthy.
It's amazing. I want to go right back to the beginning when you said you were doing everything right, and having 4 children, I started making my own soaps and deodorants, and we did the farm to table. I had eggs right, for my chickens at the house, and made sure we sourced our meat, locally, and I knew where they were coming from. And I still hear, people that do that run into the same situation as you, where it's like, why did this happen? I feel like I had been doing all of the right things.
Mhm. Yeah, and that to me is my message I want to shout on from the mountaintops. It's not just doing what you know, it's doing the stuff you don't know. And there were a lot of things when we started digging into the test that I had no idea were off. And I'd been making people for a while at that point, which is hard on your body. It just depletes your body. But I had some insulin resistance, which you don't necessarily feel at all. Usually you don't.
Hmm.
I had a hypothyroid. I had crazy low vitamin D levels because I have a genetic issue absorbing it. My homocysteine was crazy high because I don't methylate well. I just have terrible detox pathways, like genetically. And we had moved into a house about 8 months prior to the diagnosis where there was a lot of black mold.
Wow.
Uh, so that was kind of the tipping point. I also had a lot of toxic relationships that I was in that needed to be dealt with that I wasn't dealing with properly. So, I mean, there was a lot of stuff that was kind of brewing. And that's what I want people to know is that it's not one thing. I mean, people, when they hear what I do, they're like, oh, diet. And I'm like, yes, but it's so much more because you don't know what different, heavy metals, molds, toxic chemicals and such. Most people don't know what's going on with their body because they're not testing and the symptoms may not align there.
Yeah, and everybody wants it to be that one thing. But I know when I have my clients on the table, it's never the one thing. There's always, and a lot of emotional symptoms too. But I kind of want to break down what you said because you named off a lot of things. So let's start off with the testing that you did and the functional medicine piece. Let's start there and describe what you discovered about yourself.
Yeah. So the testing we looked at, and this is what I do with my clients, look at stool and urine and saliva and blood and like all the different things because we can see so much in them nowadays, which is beautiful. So there's 10 areas that I look at to see the root cause drivers of cancer. And again, like you said, it's more than one. There's usually like 6 to 8 that are radically off, and there's different things in each container. So I'll go ahead and go through those containers if that works.
Yeah, that would be great. I know our listeners would love it.
Yeah, and it goes over this more in depth with the specific test in the ebook that you guys will have the link to. So
Perfect.
the first one is metabolic. And so that has to do with the blood sugar. And again, a lot of people associate this with like hypoglycemia and you feel hangry and shaky. Like that's a very small percentage of the issues that people have with their blood sugar and their metabolism. A lot of times it's more like insulin resistance end of the spectrum where it's hyperglycemia. And that was me. I was a I could live on just carbs. And because, we've been told not to eat fat all my life, right? And you don't feel bad when you have tons of high blood sugar running around for your body to use as fuel. You feel good. The
Right.
problem is that it's not good for your body and it really is hard on your body. Um, the second area is hormones. So I mentioned that I had a lot of kids at that point, and my hormones, I was very estrogen dominant. So I had high estrogen, low progesterone, both of them. And that was an issue. I also, like I said, I had a very sluggish hypothyroid. So I just wasn't getting the energy to all my systems so they could do what they needed to do. My microbiome, that's a big one. So not just the good and bad bacteria, that's a part of it, but also are there pathogens and what's the digestion doing? So digging in, I realized that I counted up, I had taken over 30 rounds of antibiotics by the time I was 20. I had a heart murmur that they made me take a round of antibiotics every time I went to the dentist.
Yeah.
So, I mean, completely unnecessary. They don't do that now, thank goodness. But it was, I mean, that will destroy your microbiome. Um, Angiogenesis. This is a fancy word that means how the tumor will need blood sugar so much to grow because it's metabolically shifted that it will start to signal the body to grow more blood vessels so that it gets more blood with the sugar in it. And that actually wasn't a huge driver for me, but it's definitely something we test. And then stress. This looks at your adrenal hormones and such. For me, I had just moved to a different state. I didn't have a good support network. I just had, babies, and I had a lot of small ones still there. So, and there were a lot of marital issues going on. So there was a lot of stress for me. And then I alluded to the next one before, the environmental toxins. So you've got several, this is a huge bucket, and this is the area people aren't talking about. In the research, we can see that different molds are carcinogenic, different chemicals, different heavy metals, when they're off, they can be extremely driving of cancer. But yet people aren't testing them when you have cancer. Why wouldn't you want to know, like, which things are driving you, towards tumors? So for me, it was high levels of black mold. I had several different strains, and some different chemicals that were in my environment that we cleaned up and such.
Wow.
Epigenetically, so this is where, we've grown up thinking genetics is what our destiny is, and it's just you have no choice. It's like chance. But what we've learned is that epigenetics, your diet and lifestyle choices, actually can turn the cancer genes or any genes on and off. So for me, I have a lot of genetic variants that are not super positive, but knowing this, I can make specific decisions in my everyday life to affect how they actually express themselves, which is so incredibly powerful to know this is something that is very helpful for me. And it's not a one size fits all because not everyone has the same genes. The immune system, this is where it should all happen in terms of rogue cancer cells being taken care of before they're an issue. And you want to look for things like autoimmune, which I fortunately did not have issues with, vitamin D levels, which I did, all sorts of things like that that play into that immune system that we can monitor. Inflammation. The inflammation is a huge thing. And this is what I actually use with my clients to monitor progress. If a protocol or treatment or whatever they're doing is going well or not going well, you can see it on the SED rate, HSCRP, and LDH very quickly. And those are all markers of inflammation.
And inflammation too, causes autoimmune. I mean, that's one of the main.
Absolutely. Inflammation is just like drives all chronic disease. And the more we can calm things down, the better off we are in order to function well, for sure. And then the last bucket is the mental emotional one. And this is where everyone tends to avoid dealing with stuff. And I am guilty of that. It's taken me a long time to finally get some resolution to some of these toxic relationships and such. But this can very much drive cancer. And what we've seen clinically is that the year prior to a diagnosis, the cancer client usually has some traumatic event or situation that has deeply impacted and hurt their heart. And that was for sure me. And I see this over and over again. And sometimes people know what it is. And they're like, oh yeah, it was this, my dad died or whatever.
Right.
And sometimes they're like, I have no idea. And it peels back very slowly. But this is one that is very important. And if not the most important one, and it's probably the area people are not digging into the most.
No, lots of people that show up for me, they think they've done the processing, but it's still stored in the body. And when it's stored in the body, then that's when it turns into dis-ease.
Yes.
Right? So we really need to learn how to process out that emotion and deal with the things that we've experienced, especially those broken hearts and losses. And so many people are walking around with grief these days.
Yeah, it is. I love that you said that because that's what I see is that those emotions are stored in our fascia, in our tissue,
Mm.
like on a physical level, and they have to be released or they're just going to continue to fester and cause problems and blockages. And that's where, it's really important to take stock. And there's a lot of different methods to really work on this, but it's very important to do the work because it's very easy to focus on the chemical imbalances. Now I took this supplement, I did this sauna, whatever, and just ignore that.
Yeah.
That's what and I
That's what
mean,
we're trained to do.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's our mentality. And it's
Mhm.
important to get that out there that needs to be taken care of.
Yeah, everybody do your emotional release exercises. Go out there and do kickboxing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm contemplating myself throwing on a workshop, just to focus on emotional release and what all those emotionally release exercises are, and just have a scream and cry fest. I think it would be fantastic for everybody in the world right now.
Oh, yes, absolutely. I think that we don't scream and cry enough.
We don't. Yeah, we're not taught to.
hmm
Yeah. I also want to bring up the mold because I was listening to one of your episodes earlier this morning. I'm in the shower, I'm looking up in my skylight, and there's mold, right? And I've been meaning to get to it. And in a previous life, I'm in a house, we're doing a bathroom remodel. And when they tear out the bathroom, there's black mold. I was pregnant with my third child and I got symptomatic asthma from it. It's really serious. So, what can we do to like test and get to know and clear out that mold because it really does do a lot of harmful effects to the body.
Yes, I think this is one of the biggest crises in our day, and no one's talking about it. Our standard of care doesn't acknowledge it, although if you look at like selling a house, they get it in terms of the legal laws and such in different states. But this is something that, yes, if you see it, that's an issue. And there's lots of different types of mold. Some are more carcinogenic than others. But there's also lots of other things like they're associated with like Alzheimer's and such that are just as bad, if not worse. And oftentimes with mold, you don't see anything. And I hear people a lot of times say things like, oh, well, I don't live in like a wet place like Seattle. I'm fine. I live in Phoenix. And I just want to put it out there like, do not be, don't miss this because I have a ton of clients in Phoenix. It's in the HVAC systems that are pumping
Yeah.
all day long, all summer long, right? Also, another myth that I hear a lot is that people think that, oh, well, it's only in old houses or that you're going to smell it. And you do not have to smell it. It does not have to be an old house. It takes about 24 to 48 hours of a little moisture behind, the wall that is the perfect substrate, that drywall, to
hmm
grow mold. And you're not going to see it, but the mold spores can actually go through the drywall so that it's back there hiding, but you're getting all the fabulous mold spores that you're breathing in that take up residence and create havoc. It's such a huge deal. And in order to test, I recommend that clients do a urine test. There's several great companies. I usually use Vibrant or Great Plains, but they can test a huge spectrum of the the mycotoxins, which are the byproducts that the mold spores are giving off. Now, the other big thing that I wish people were talking about is that when you have toxic mold, like you mentioned, you had symptoms.
hmm
I I didn't have any symptoms. I had none.
Yeah.
And what I have found, so I work exclusively with cancer clients, and I have only had one cancer client that hasn't come back with toxic levels of mold.
Wow.
That's insane, right?
Yeah.
But they're not coming to me with any mold symptoms. I mean, there's some vague things like fatigue or something, or like they, tend to be mucousy, but they're not having like what you think of as like chronic mold clients where they've got like a spectrum of all sorts of crazy stuff. But they showed up with cancer. So every person, depending on their genetic makeup and their environment, they're going to have a different presentation. And I just want it to be out there that you don't have to have symptoms to have mold driving some of these diseases. And when you think of something, especially like Alzheimer's, that's such a long game where there's like 20 years or more before you actually start to see symptoms. Like, what if we could dive in there and see that there was mold? And we know that mold drives Alzheimer's, amongst other things like blood sugar dysregulation, which is called type 3 diabetes now. like we could see this stuff ahead of time. So it's not about turning Alzheimer's around. It's about stopping it. And we have the tools. That's the
Yeah,
crazy
let's
part.
be proactive.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So after people have a positive urine test and it comes back and they've got all these different things off, that's when I have them dig into the house. Because the thing you want to know is that on the urine test, it's an excretion test, but it doesn't show us where the problem is. This could be something that was 10 years ago in a totally different house, but you want to make sure the house you're in, and if you go somewhere to work, that that place of work, wherever you're spending time breathing things in, that it is clean before you bother spending tons of money and energy actually detoxing your body.
Wow. And it's not only in the air too, it's in our food. When we look at how, like, I went over to Europe, I could eat everything, right? But I come back here and everybody has food sensitivities. And it's amazing how food companies will actually take out ingredients for shipping over to Europe, but keep all of those ingredients in for us, not to mention like growing the wheat. I'm blessed to be able to buy acorn wheat at my grocery store here on Vashon Island in the Pacific Northwest. So we do have mold issues, but the wheat is not what it used to be.
Yes, exactly. And that's that glyphosate that's sprayed on everything. And
That's
the
horrible.
way they spray it right at the end for the grains to dry them up, which is not necessary, it really stays in our food. So yes, the grains and such are a big place. The other big foods are coffee, peanuts, and Brazil nuts. Those are all like really well-known things. So like making sure if you drink coffee or if you're using it for coffee enemas that you get mold-free coffee. Also, peanut butter, they're not really like certifying as mold-free now, but maybe you just want to switch to almond butter, especially if you have issues with it. But it's a huge thing. I will tell you that the majority, if people are having like super high levels of toxic mold, it's not going to be just from the food. It's going to have some kind of an environmental component, I
Mhm.
would say most, if not all the time. So making sure that those houses are shored up. This is where I get so frustrated as a practitioner because clients come to me and they're like, okay, my husband hired this guy and they said there's nothing there. And I start to dig in and ask what the mold inspector did. And they're like, oh, yeah, they just set some Petri dishes out. They were there for like a half an hour. I'm like, no, 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 no. This is not doing it. Like they need to be in there, getting their eyes in your crawl space in your attic. They need to be looking in your HVAC system and looking through the vents. They need to be looking under every single sink. And, they have special technology, thermal technology to look at things. This is what they need to do. And it needs to be several hours. And they're like, oh, so it's a really big deal. But if you want to find it, it hides and it's tricky to find. And,
Mhm.
yes, it's expensive, but how much would you pay to avoid Alzheimer's or cancer? That's the question.
Yeah. Let's dive into diet. What were some of the diet changes you made for yourself, Katrina?
Yeah. So this is fascinating because, like I said, I started doing like a raw vegan juicing thing. And what I found was that for cancer, a ketogenic diet is actually being shown in the research to be much, super, super effective, much more effective. And for me, I started doing it. And I remember when my practitioner told me about that, I'm like, no, that's dangerous. Like this was before keto became cool and stuff and got a lot of publicity. I was like, no, you can't just like take out a whole food group. And she's like, Katrina, here, read some books, learn about it. Like, I think this is important. And I started reading, and before I even finished the book, I was reading Mercola's Fat for Fuel. I
Mm.
started doing the diet, and this is where it gets mind blowing. So I have bipolar, and I had been on meds, monitored. I hated it. I didn't feel good. They didn't help. And so I had been white knuckling at that point for about 20 years. Just feeling crappy, awful all the time. And so with this diet, after about 3 months, I noticed kind of feeling better. And I didn't really want to say anything because I didn't know if it was like a passing phase or something. But my husband was doing a family worship one night and talking about like being joyful in all things, and he was giving this example of some friends that had lost their house in a fire and how the community had built their house again, and it ended up being like a huge blessing. And my daughter pipes up and she goes, oh, yeah, like mom's cancer. And we were both just like, what? And she goes, well, if mom hadn't had cancer, she wouldn't have tried keto and now she's happy.
Oh,
So for me and my body, not only was the ketogenic diet helping the cancer and starving it of its fuel source, giving me the ketones for the therapeutic effect they have, but it also was super therapeutic to where I've played with it now for a very long time. And it's the switch that puts me in remission. And it drives me crazy that no one's talking about this, like complete remission, no symptoms, food alone.
so explain to our audience what is keto. And I did a little investigating into this earlier and have switched most of my diet to this. So I really want you to like talk a little bit about what it is and how it benefits your body.
Absolutely. So a ketogenic diet is very, very high fat and it's very low carbs, moderate amount of protein. So what basically we're like a hybrid car. We're designed so that we can either burn glucose, the carbs, or fat. And we should be able to go back and forth. And that's what we call metabolic flexibility. And with all the dietary guidelines that we've all grown up with about don't eat fat, fat makes you fat, fat will kill you, heart disease, blah, 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 which is not true. And it's been shown in the research very clearly. We have been very carb heavy and like to the point where now, like a typical meal that seems normal to us is not what people were eating 200 years ago.
Right.
I'm not talking thousands, I'm talking hundreds of years. And so to turn things around, shifting and forcing and helping your body to burn fat again completely changes the metabolism and how the body's working so that, think back, high school science, the Krebs cycle, where you're actually changing and making energy. Fat is just a much cleaner fuel. So the majority of all of the free radicals, you've heard those are bad, that we make, and why we need anti-inflammatories, it's from burning carbs for fuel. When you burn fat, it's so much less. I mean, it's insane. And so there's a lot of different things. And then when you actually get into ketosis, your body will start to make these things called ketones that can actually pass through the blood-brain barrier and just your brain lights up, like your body runs better. You usually have more energy, all sorts of different fun benefits, which are not why you do it for cancer, but they're like really nice side benefits and such. So most people start to then ask, like, what does my diet look like? A lot of times online, you'll see things where it's like a big burger with bacon and all this. And it's like, no, no, no. You want to keep very low. It's not super high protein because you want to make sure that if you eat too much protein, you can turn it into carbs with a process called gluconeogenesis, which that's not helping the situation. So my plate looks like a lot of vegetables, like maybe a big salad or a whole bunch of broccoli, cauliflower kind of things with a little side of meat sprinkling on top or something and lots of fat. And the fat kind of melts into whatever I'm eating, so you don't see that. So it looks like I'm eating a ton of vegetables, which I am. And they're the low carb ones. So all those really nutrient dense, cruciferous and such that have all the things you need for basically getting all those other properties like the sulfur and different vitamins and such.
Right. And let's talk a little about, because there's carcinogens in oils too. So there's specific oils to stay away from as well. Stick with the healthy
Yes.
fats.
And a lot of times when people go to a ketogenic diet, especially if you're just looking online, it's like the Velveeta and bacon stuff, and it's very dirty. And that is the key thing, is that you want to make sure it's clean, not only in terms of like eating meat that doesn't have all the hormones and antibiotics in it, but also the oils. And so staying away, like never touch the vegetable oils. So soy, canola, corn, all those things are absolutely terrible for your body. And they are the most inflammatory thing in our diet, I would say. Well, sugar's up there, but the inflammatory oils, they are super rancid. And a lot of times, they're making it as a byproduct of some other commercial industries. They're the trash.
Yeah.
And what they have to do in terms of bleaching and deodorizing those oils, it's just really disgusting. Look into it if you want, but be aware you might be grossed out. But those oils, those are all the polyunsaturated fats that are super delicate. they should be handled with kid gloves um, when they're processed in cold temperatures, without light, without any heat and all this stuff. And they should be stored in dark jars, you know? So if you're
Mhm.
getting these oils, like I've never seen them like that. Have you?
Yeah.
They're not. And so you know they're rancid and they're going to be highly, highly inflammatory to your body. Yeah.
Yes,
So the
and
ones, oh, go
against
ahead.
your microbiome.
Very much against like the whole thing. It's just an attack on your body. So the ones you want to focus on, if you're cooking and heating things up, focus on the things, the saturated fats that are solid at room temperature, things like coconut oil, butter, ghee, even things like lard or tallow. Those are going to be ones you want to cook with because they're going to be less likely to go rancid when you start to heat it up, less sensitive to it. And the smoke point's not what we're looking at. People get confused about that. Is it saturated or unsaturated? That's what we care about. Now, in terms of other fats, I love avocado oil and olive oil, as well as avocados and olives and
Yeah.
such. Those are fantastic to make salad dressings or mayonnaise or something with. Especially the avocado oil, is so just smooth and tasteless. It just goes into anything. But to get a nice profile of different fats and such, I love to mix in the olive oil when it's something that's a little more zingy, like a balsamic vinaigrette or something that's got something that's going to hide it. Because not everyone loves the olive oil taste.
Hmm. And what do you say to people like me who are a vegetarian? Do you have clients that come to you that are vegetarian, and how do you work with them?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I will, I mean, you can do ketogenic as a vegetarian, you know, especially if you're eating dairy and eggs, that's not very hard at all. But when you get to like the vegans, that's where it gets tricky because the forms of protein that they have choices of are always very high carb. And so if they're not willing to have like eggs or dairy, that makes it where it's like, I can't really work with you. But usually, you know, I ask them some questions. Is this a moral religious thing, or is this I'm worried about the cleanliness and the health aspects? Because if it's the health aspects, that's a lot of times a matter of where the community is throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Because I 100% agree with them. I would not eat the food that is out there in the supermarket at all in terms of, you know, the meat sources are terrible. I mean, this is why we started raising our own meat, because I want to make sure they have happy lives, because a happy animal is going to be a healthy animal for you. And the beautiful thing is that, like, you hear people talk about, oh, you need to eat lots of vegetables, they've got all the vitamins. And especially in cancer circles, they talk about the vitamin A in the carrots, right?
Mm.
There is no vitamin A in carrots. And people are often surprised when I say that. What there is there's beta carotene. And this is the same for a lot of poor quality supplements. They have beta carotene in it, which is not vitamin A. It's a precursor to vitamin A. So your body has to do the extra work, which if somebody has cancer, they don't need any extra work.
Yeah.
And about 30% of the population genetically does not have the ability to do this. I would be one of those people. And most of my cancer clients do have this problem. So, you know, saying thank you to the animals for doing that work for us and being able to get those vitamins in a more bioavailable, ready to go form is really important, especially if somebody has some of those genetic SNPs. So we have discussions about what's best for them and why they're doing this or that, because there's a lot of factors going on here with it.
Hmm. What about supplements?
Supplements are super important. So usually there's a lot of areas that need addressing. So like I just went through all those 10 different areas.
Hmm.
Based on what shows up on the test, I will personalize the recommendations because not everyone needs the same thing. And quite frankly, there's certain minerals that are in the multivitamins that I would never give a cancer client. Like I'm never going to give them iron or calcium or some of these things that are actually going to drive their inflammation levels up and cause problems specifically. But, you know, depending on what's going on, if they've got a disrupted microbiome or something, maybe, you know, some pathogens, maybe some mold, they're going to need some very strategic short-term intervention to eradicate and then heal the gut and, you know, make sure that they're in a good place going forward.
Great. Katrina, I'm curious, like day in the life, when you were going through your healing process, what did your day look like?
Oh, it's funny. I actually had gone through this a few months ago and looked at my list. I made a schedule, and it was like every minute was packed because there were so many things I was doing. I mean, yes, I was homeschooling the kids and stuff,
Yeah.
which took some time, but all the cooking and things like the saunas, the rebounding, the dry brushing, the coffee enemas, all the stuff. Like it was a lot. And then you try to get in, oh, you need to have fun. It's like you have to schedule fun in. And it was a very, very full day of things like that. And I was really blessed at that time to be able to do all that. I had a lot of my kids were super helpful with the new baby because I had older kids by that point, and I was at home so I could, multitask. There was a lot of times when I was doing a coffee enema, with a long skirt on, and I'd be laying down and my kids would be next to me reading to me or something for school. And, so kind of odd little quirks there. Looks very different.
I bet. And then also, I want to talk about the fear because you've just had a baby, you're nursing, you know, so often you go in, you get the cancer diagnosis, and it's automatically like, do this treatment, here's the fear. And then it like compounds your fear that you automatically get when anybody hears the word cancer.
Yes, yes, that's a very real thing. And going in for the cancer diagnosis, and I hear just horror stories all the time. They're bullies, and
Mhm.
it's very, very high pressure sales, which is unfortunate because they're doing it in the name of your health, and they make broad claims that I just don't think they can back up. Like they say things like, "Oh, if you don't do this, this is your chance of dying." And the numbers they come up with, I'm like, where did you get those from? Because those aren't published. And oh, hey, I wasn't on your radar. I survived. I'm not in those numbers. Like, how accurate are those numbers?
Mhm.
Um, it's really hard, and it frustrates me because as a practitioner, I know that, like I mentioned, stress causes cancer. It's a driver. It's a huge driver. And what are they doing with this process? They're driving it further, which is not how it needs to be done. For me, the way I work as a practitioner, I want to reduce that stress and that fear as much as possible because I know what it's like to be in that place, and I know it's not needed. So when we go over the labs and discuss stuff, it's always with a positive spirit. And let's say, like, oh, you have this genetic SNP. Like, no, let's focus on, look, now you know what to do. This is huge. This is a blessing. This is a good thing. Because it is very empowering to know this is why I got cancer. These are my drivers. Like I just articulate out my drivers to you. They don't talk about that in standard of care. That question of why is never mentioned. And to me, that's where the biggest fear comes from. It's this, like there's a black cloud always there of when's it going to come back? You don't know. And they just leave it up to chance, and they'll say things like, hey, it doesn't matter. Just eat what you want. Like it's supposed to be a good thing that you can eat whatever you want. And from my experience, that is not a good thing. Clients want to know why so that they know what to do and they can plan their life accordingly. Because
Right.
when you don't have any actionable steps, you're in a free fall, and it is a very scary place.
Knowledge is power. And that's what drove you to be on your specific cancer journey,
Exactly.
healing or healing journey. I'll rephrase that.
That's okay. I embrace the cancer. I am super grateful. I look back at it. Now, granted, it was not super fun to go through. I'm not invalidating that.
Yeah.
But looking back, I am so grateful because that is where I, along that path, discovered the tools to heal the bipolar and put that in remission as well as the cancer.
That's a
And
win.
my life, my quality of life is so much better, like exponentially. I wouldn't change it for anything.
You also brought in talking about it and prayer, which I
Yeah.
think are really important because what people don't understand is when you have a lot of people sending you healing energy, it benefits you. So talk a little bit about that journey where you're putting out to the world what you're going through.
Yeah, if you can't tell, I'm an extrovert. I am very open with everything. And when I had the cancer, I knew I wanted prayer. I wanted everybody that I knew to be praying because it's a weird, scary position. And you don't know what's going to happen. So I sent an email out to everybody I knew, like literally my entire database, which included some non-personal contacts. I'm like, whatever, if they don't want it, they can delete it. But I explained to them, I have this going on. This is what I'm doing for it. I just want to let you know. And I get that this is not how everybody handles it, and that's fine. However, if you do not agree with me, would you please keep it to yourself? Because I don't want the negativity and the doubt creeping in. What I would like is your prayers. And if you feel led to, you know, something else, that's fine. But please, I want the prayers and I don't want the negativity. And that was probably the best thing I did in the whole journey. Like it was so, oh, just it was like a giant hug. The response that I got from people, like not monetary, but like people that wanted to, you know, come alongside and like, hey, can I clean your house? Like, I mean, just how humbling and sweet and precious it was. But the prayers,
Yeah.
people that even to this day are still praying for me and my family is just so beautiful. And I'm super grateful. Unfortunately, there are some family members that and friends that don't talk to me really anymore. And
No.
I am actually glad, and that's fine. I'm not offended if we have that big a difference of opinion. I'm grateful that they were respectful, that they didn't spew it on me, because
Right.
that's what I asked for.
Beautiful. I went down to Arizona last year and saw Lee Carroll, and he had put out to his whole community that he was going through this heart surgery, and he had one of the most miraculous recoveries that the doctors had seen. So it really does work to have your community behind you. And I'm glad that the people that weren't behind you stepped aside, you know, and didn't, you know, project onto you. That was
Yeah.
tough with them. Yeah.
It's interesting now on the other side as a practitioner, I get to see a lot of people that don't do that. And they've got some friend or family member that's constantly sticking the negative. Did you do enough? You know, you should really do this, like pressuring them all the time. And that can be one of the biggest things that undermines this kind of work.
Mhm.
I can't tell you enough. Like, that drives me nuts. And I'm like, no, we should have a talk about this because it's a big problem. And yeah.
And it's really coming from that person's own fear.
Yes, exactly. It is. It's their issue that they're spewing onto other people.
Mhm. Yeah. So what did you do to kind of isolate yourself from that and be able to be in a space of healing for yourself and forward momentum for your healing process?
Well, I was already kind of out of the way. We were living on 15 acres out in the middle of nowhere. So I kind of had a little bubble physically.
Awesome.
Um, we just kind of hunkered down, and I did like what I talked to you about. Like I had my whole day planned out of what I needed to get done in terms of different therapies as well as, you know, personal stuff. And with that, you know, just selecting who was a positive influence in my life. Yes, keep coming and nurturing me and helping me and such, but keeping the others out. All of that, you know, was really huge. Definitely.
What was something that's just a standout for you that you would share with our audience if they're going through this right now, or if they were to get a diagnosis in the future? What would be your advice to them?
Yeah, there's a couple different things there where some of the stuff we've already talked about. I think it's really, really important that people focus on, you know, standard of care is not addressing the why. So while some people may choose standard of care, and that's totally fine, there's a time and a place for it. Make sure you go back at some point and get the why so that you don't have that fear forever, because that's, you know, if the soil that grew the original cancer is not addressed, why would it surprise us when the cancer grows right back?
Right.
Um, the other big thing is that cancer is not one thing. It's multifactorial. We know this in the research. So one drug does not address the whole terrain of the body and how it's allowing the cancer to grow. So it's usually a perfect storm of like 6 to 8 things that are off, and you want to address all of them. You know, we want to make sure you get all the smoking guns on the table at the beginning. And everyone is different. When people look at alternative therapies, there's a lot of things that are absolutely amazing. They have great stories for a lot of people, but not for everybody. And this is where you want to be very careful, because If you're doing things like IV vitamin C or hyperbaric oxygen or some of these really awesome modalities that are kind of pricey, and even the ones that aren't pricey, you want to make sure that it's what your body needs, because these like IV vitamin C, I recommend it to my clients quite often, but if they're in certain dysaerobic states metabolically, it can actually drive the cancer further and be a negative thing. And so we can check this with a G6PD, but most people are not doing that work. And so it's kind of like a shotgun. Everybody have all these supplements. They're good for cancer. Well, maybe, but if everybody's cancer has different drivers, then no, it's not a one size fits all. And that's where we want to test. We don't want to guess.
Yeah, everybody's different. I also want to talk about hormones also, because we have not dipped into hormones and nobody ever talks about it. And fluctuations in hormones can be brutal to the body.
Yes, yes. So hormones, so I'm thinking you're talking about sex hormones specifically, because usually when people say that, so I mean, they are a big driver, can be, of cancer. People talk about the different receptor sites and things when they're talking about the HER2 and triple negative and all that kind of stuff. And the thing is that we want to look at what's going on in the body. And so instead of throwing out things like dairy because it's got hormones in it, why don't we have dairy-free or hormone-free dairy? That is a thing. The other issue that I have is, it's kind of weird, but of all the clients I've had, most of them come to me from an oncologist. I have never once had somebody come where the oncologist had tested their hormone levels.
Wow.
Now, I mean, why would you not look at what's going on there? I mean, I've had clients where they've come to me. There's one I'm thinking of. She was like my first cancer client. Her oncologist had done some surgery, but she didn't want the chemo radiation. She came to me. Her hormones had not been tested, even though she's got breast cancer. I mean, this is known to be a hormone-driven cancer. So I tested her hormones. I've never seen hormones so off the charts. And we started talking, and it turns out her naturopath had given her bioidentical hormones 10 years ago. She'd never changed the dose, never tested them. And so there's these insane high levels of estrogen, and they weren't giving her progesterone to temper it. And it was just a nightmare. But people aren't testing this. So, we address that. And it's just crazy to me how negligent a lot of times this is, where we're not really testing and looking at what's going on, not taking a full history and such.
Yeah, we really need to test the whole body. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
like you said in the beginning, it's not just one thing. We have to look at the broad spectrum of everything that's going in within the body and
Yeah.
emotion. Yeah.
Yeah. And we tend to look at it like, okay, there's hormones over here. There's your thyroid over here. There's your microbiome over here. But they all signal to each other. I mean, there's estrogen receptors on like every part of your body.
Yeah.
There's digestive enzyme receptors on every part of your body. Like, why are they there? And we don't even know all the answers to these questions. But if you're not looking and thinking and coming from a paradigm where they connect and they overlap, like it's going to be a little confusing, and it's not going to work well.
So if someone wants to work with you, how do they find you, Katrina?
Yeah. So my website is cancerfreedom.com, and there's an application to work with me on there. I'm actually launching a group program, let's see, in March of 24. So that's coming up. But yeah, I really enjoy doing this work with people and look forward to connecting with people. I'm
Awesome.
also on Instagram, just my name, Katrina Foe, and then Facebook, it's Nutritional Pilates, which is the name of my book.
Great. And then you also have a free ebook for our listeners.
Yes. Yes. And this is going to dive even deeper into the 10 areas I talked about and which specific tests you want to look at and everything, and understanding this approach, because it is so very different to look at the why than just let's give the standard 3.
Sweet. And I'll have that down in the show notes too, everybody. Katrina, it's been such a pleasure to host you. What is one final gem of wisdom that you would like to leave our listeners with today?
I would just say test, don't guess, because there are so many things out there that we just don't even know are issues. Most of my clients are coming to me doing tons of different things like I was doing to help their body, but they don't know what's going off, just like I didn't. So those tests are really powerful, and it's such a blessing that we have them nowadays.
Awesome. Thank you, Katrina. It's been a pleasure to host you. Thank you so much for joining Raise the Vibe with Liz.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure.
And thank you everyone for joining us again. I'm Liz Peterson. This is Raise the Vibe with Liz, and you can find me on all social media platforms and my website at raisethevibewithliz.com. Thank you everybody, and have a good day. Bye now.